start with a question, if anyone has one.
Gyumed 나 화성기 지내는지 모르겠어. 아니 화성 음식이면서 내가 주제자랑 주제 이식 데리고다가 아니 저와 사람이 모르겠어.
주제 팀이는 어쩌면 말이지.
또 이제는 어느서 내가 루도기 값을 루도기 값으면서 내가 규명할 때네 아니 내가 규명 주기로 딱 내가 규명 그대로서 주식 있으니까 주식 들리고 내가 저 메스 그러니까 이 어제 내가 규명 가졌어
So the question was being asked, if I understood it correctly, that point was made earlier that Buddhists maintain that there's no logical connection, necessary connection between words, the import of the words, and the objects that the words are referencing, and that meaning that the words don't necessarily prove by their very existence what they are describing. So if that's the Buddhist position, and yet the claim or the point was made that we want to hold that the Buddha is a spiritual authority, and therefore his speech is unerring, and we can trust it as being valid in relation to the subject matter that it's saying. So how can you?
So specifically in the reverse progression, we start with proving that the teachings are flawless. So is there then a way to prove that the teachings are flawless as a means to prove that the teacher is flawless?
So, well, I heard what she said. I don't know.
한바디나는 추유 집에 다들어 지당 주제를 다루어 내 한바디나는 추유를 해봐야 말와 다들이 죄분한 시제니 한바디나는 추유하래 시제니 죄분 때 주제를 다들을 때 한바디나는 추디 토비치도 우리는 추 토비 해봐야 말이야 추 내가 인물과 재산 그 주직 자리지 그 주직 자리다 강베디나는 추여에서 추 니부지 저민두가 저야 말이 주직 자리를 때니 강베디나는 추 토버디 양말과 지단지 다 주직 자리 주제 되는 저야 말세 지단 상기 준대 되기 중에 탑도 제가 세월 중에 순디기 순대를 때니 아니 동가 생기고 주비야와 디카레스 주다가레스 순대를 때니 sungki chejati gyumed to indi tobe tembe gyumed to indi sungki 저것들 돈을 내고 또 이제 문디 생활이를 지도해야 봐. 그랬더니 뒤떠야 돼. 뒤 죄자디단 되어야 돼.
계속 로봇이 얘기면서 그날 저희가 시비 저한테 나대니 이따가 또 돈이 많이 있어. 되게 좀
어디 네, 메타부터는 기능이 제일와. 그래야 그게 메타부시기 슬랍스나. 가르치는 메타부만 임베치래. 메타부시 난가를 시기 슬랍이나. 그 메타부 주그리. 난가를 때는 메타부세 주그리 봐. 그 다른이들이 난가는 메타버스기에 했어야지. 민도 그와이는 집 도축을 봐. 난가는 메타버스기에 했으라고이나. 그 메타버스 지역으로 하다. 집들이 메타버스 지역을 했어. 이제 집들을 때는 메타버스 도와야 다시 공부할 때는 공부 메타버리 있지. 메타버 중에 되게 공부 메타버도 이 공부 메타버리 있으면 시대에 되는 공부 메타버도 해야 돼. 시대에 공부 메타버 때는 해야 돼. 그 중에 가사들이 공부 메타버도 돼야 돼. 양게 똑같이 받대 버려. 어디는 공부에다가 또 투여해봐. 이제 공부에다가 쓰여지 신다지 납시하나 가와리 지리지 가와지 공부에다가 쓰는 가와리 쓰게 납시하나 아니 그 공부에다가 시주를 봐. 공부에 가와리 지그래서 쓰셔라. 자신이 그 거반에 접촉을 주주해봐. 어디 쓰는 어디 제자디 메타버드 저 두기야 말이야.
You want to explain?
That's what I love.
Basically, you started out by saying that the Buddhist position is that generally what words assert does not serve to prove the content of what they're saying. My understanding is that this falls into the area of what is known as testimony, whether words that are spoken in certain ways, whether it's spiritual literature or whether it's spoken by someone who could or could not be considered as knowledgeable about a particular subject, whether or not that speech, based on the source of the speech, who asserted the speech, if that's sufficient to believe what the speech is saying. And the Buddhists basically say that that's never, the only person's speech that has that quality is the speech of a Buddha. And the only reason that we can claim that is because we can establish that the Buddha is an authority, a flawless speaker, particularly, not just about anything, but particularly about spiritual subjects. And if and when we establish that, then we can trust his speech as being flawless. And the reverse is true as well. We can examine his speech for ourselves, in particular speech about subjects that are not directly evident in experience, but particularly speech about the nature of things that are not evident, such as impermanence and suffering and selflessness. And we can, through our own reasoning, we can determine that that speech which is unique in the sense that only the Buddha taught that subject matter. We can verify its extraordinariness and its truthfulness, and from that, then that was your question, was how can we then determine that the nature of the speaker is without error, and so that's sort of the unique subject matter that this chapter is about. But generally, as Rinpoche just said, if someone makes certain assertions, the assertion itself does not carry the weight of being capable of proving the existence of what's being asserted. So just because someone says there's water in that building over there, there's no connection between the purported water and the statement that says that the water's there. There's nothing about that speech that we can rely upon to know that in fact there is water there, or not. And then Rinpoche gave another example where he was talking about even the speech about impermanence, that even though generally impermanence is true of certain things, causally produce things, that if the person who utters them is not really knowledgeable about the speech that he's using, even if it's true, then that's another instance of the case where even truthful speech is not something that in and of itself can be relied upon as to what it's saying. And he made some further points about that. When we're talking about speech in terms of the Dharma, then we're talking about there is the Dharma that is expressed in the form of words, but those words have meanings. And so then another aspect of the Dharma is if you investigate those words and you gain some understanding of those words, and that's the aspect of the Dharma that's known as the cognitional form of the Dharma. So that's one of the distinctions that is important in answering the question that the person made about what's unique about the Buddha's teaching and how we can investigate that and infer from that the Buddha is an enlightened being. Something like that.
Dajo mama tu beri betul dinas juga tanam sejina. Tame bac chimata beri bacuji. Tame bac kemata beri bacuji. Iba ngamun tundi. Dinas isto.
Boleh le.
Anji dia ada. Jun.
Oh, dinas. Tame bagaimana le?
Tame bagaimana le? Bacuji. Iba ngamun tundi. Iba image. Tiga orang ngamun tundi. Baca.
No.
Tadi ciga mesidi. Tame be. Tame baciga me ni ilu to bacuji.
No.
Rita chima tham jordi chaje giri bai image. Tadi jawa chima tuberi bai.
No.
Jawa ngama tuberi baci.
No.
Jawa chima tuberi baci. Tanji di jawa ni shedi ombo tamata ni lo se shi ombo tamata ujung soji image ombo tamata. Ne lo se wa ta ujung soji image se jebra. Ta tanje di but ma du
No.
ma du na jawa chima tuberi bati ngama tuberi bati jije di su jawa chima tuberi bati res.
There is a statement in Gyumed commentary which is kind of a summary of the Buddhist position on the arguments for the existence of past lives and future lives. And so, a summary of the argument for past lives is that it says Hamelpa means an ordinary person, an ordinary samsaric person, then who has just been born and who possesses a mind. Then that person who has just been born, his or her mind that they possess at that time must have been preceded by an earlier mind, meaning a mind prior to his or her birth. You can think of birth as the moment of conception in the absolute sense. And it says the reason that you can infer that, or the reason that you can know that to be true, is because it is a mind. So that's the argument. That seems. So the point is that mind is something that is an impermanent or something that arises, is a causally produced thing, and it must be produced by something which is similar in nature. The material cause for the mind must also be mental in nature. So whatever the first moment of that mind is, it must have derived from an earlier moment of the continuum of that consciousness, and that earlier moment had to have been prior to this life, and hence there must have been an earlier existence of the person who was just born. So that's the argument for the past life. And then the summary of the argument for future lives is slightly different in that it says the mind of a person who is on the verge of dying, who is about to die. So it means a person at the end of life, who is at the final moment of their existence. Their mind, it says, must be reborn. I mean, samjor means must take birth. Means that's what an ordinary person means. That's a samsaric person must become reborn, and therefore must give rise to a future mind of his or her continuum. Why? Because that mind of that ordinary person at the final moment of their death is a mind that is still under the influence of attachment. That's key. And so that argument has to be unpacked. But the argument is that a mind that is still under the influence of desire must, at the end, following that life, be then followed by, or there must come about another moment of consciousness. So that's the essence of the argument for a future life.
차제기 차진들이 거인데 고야지 근데 자주 탐하게 쓰니까 이거 지금 참수다 참치를서 저 지금 참쳐야 되게 말아 자주 탐에 쓰는데 그냥 쌤자들이라 자주 탐에 쌤사지 켈리들이 켈티니 이거 굉장히 중요해요. 이 제도에는 이거 인체도 제도에서는 이거 지금 성찰 내시 다시 루니야 다른데 차지기 차지기 쉐바이메스 차바디 제베 쉐바이사 아니 다시 차바디 제베 쉐바이사 저 지금 상추를 해서 저 지만 그 저지물 주변에 보이봐. 저지만 예를 참절디 있어요. 저지만 참절디 자집이 이렇게 보이지. 차바디 집에 샘디는 어디 이렇게 지금 참절디다. 레이 좀 이제 참절디. 저지 겨워지는 참 겨워지면 제일 참주비 지단 리버인 배치성이 개발되지. 리버인은 리버치만 참조해야지 개발해야지는 자주 배치 리버도 속한 거고 리버치만 니는 줘야지 아마리 야네한 니는 줘야지 저의 동네 지시에 봐 동네 주나라 늘 야네한도 또 야네한 니는 줘야지 이 코어도 참 잘 시에버라 다 차지기 리버이를 제세야지
So, between these two arguments, the latter argument, the argument for future lives, for the existence of future lives, is unique in that the prior argument, the argument for past lives, said that simply the fact that a person has a consciousness in this life, that's sufficient to argue that it must have been preceded by a mind of a similar nature and was part of the same continuum of that person. But in general, you can't argue that the mind that exists at the final moment of this life, just because it's a mind, necessarily will be followed by a subsequent moment of consciousness following this life. So the key word, there are two elements in that argument. One is that it uses the word samjor. Samjor is the Tibet or the Buddhist term for conception, samsaric conception in particular. It means literally it means to be joined to a future life, and it refers to the moment at which a person's consciousness takes birth in the mother's womb, in the case of a mammal. So that's the moment of conception. And that moment of conception is understood as being a form of samsaric rebirth. So, for instance, you would not say for an arhat. So an arhat, by definition, is someone who has abandoned all the mental afflictions and attachment in particular. So the final moment of an arhat's consciousness in his or her life, when an arhat passes away, then the arhat is not subject to the union in the sense of conception with a samsaric rebirth, because they don't have the cause of the mental afflictions that would force or which would require a new consciousness in a subsequent rebirth to occur. So that's part of the essential force of that argument. And they're in the text. So the fact that it's a mind that is still subject to desire, the key to that is to say that that's sufficient to prove that the final moment of consciousness will be followed by a subsequent moment of samsaric consciousness. That's an interesting claim that has to be properly investigated. Another point that sort of surrounds this whole issue is, well, what happens to this is the larger question of what happens to an arhat's consciousness when he or she, his or her life comes to an end. So there are some Buddhist schools who hold that the consciousness, the continuum ceases, and the arhat ceases to exist in a sense. And that's gyud chek. Gyud means to continue. Chek means it stops. So other schools will say that the arhat's mind continuum doesn't cease, but nevertheless he or she is not subject to a samsaric form of conception and rebirth. But that's a larger issue, but it's relevant to the discussion.
다지단 야주메 셈디 리버치만 참 중요해. 리버치만 그래서는 야주메 셈디 상기리 남자 관계기의 이식이 누구를 봐. 이 리버티 리버장도 참 좋디 리버 남아디 리버 치마도 참 좋아 라중의 규칙이 리버티 티징 티징 파바가 있어요. 티바 친구 남들이나 티바 친구 아니 규칙 샘디 티바 친구 규칙은 티지 생기를 비치는 참 자유가 샘디 티지 생기를 티지 생기 게임 티지 생기 가지고 생각하는데 티지 생기를 생수는 누구가 어디 때 리버치만 참도 참 중요해 리버
규칙 말했어.
어디 규칙 말해 상기가 사는 거지.
So there are different schools, there are different views of so-called Tatu Kekpa Sumseng Chikta, Kekpa Chik. So there's the one Mahayana school which says there's really ultimately only one vehicle, and that is the Buddha's path to enlightenment, which can be reached in different ways. One way being that one reaches the end of the Hinayana path, becomes an arahat, passes away, enters into what's called nirvana without remainder, but his or her consciousness does not cease, as other schools maintain. So this one vehicle doctrine states that what happens is that the arahat's mind, following his or her death, is, we can say, joined to a subsequent consciousness. It's not joined to a samsaric rebirth. So that consciousness enters into a kind of a state of peaceful nirvana, which is kind of almost like a dormant state for a long period of time, and then at some point the Buddhas will, quote, awaken them, and then even those Hinayana arahats will have to generate bodhicitta and then continue on to the path, on the path to ultimate enlightenment. So that view, which is the one that is generally held to be true, is that even the mind continuum of an arahat doesn't end following his or her death. It continues to exist.
だってね、女学ソジャースミギュテス、だってチャナティカジルパータンバルバ、イルティにルバシでけばいいな、女学君が女学しやれば、女学君がソジャーチェンとテグレスレブルバ。Di niente la dola sopra un buta lo chiede ne va meba gashi soja su mingyuru shina sta joan soja tek maris no hejidi joan tamje soja su sabin ditani je di joan soja su mingyuru te se lenke bare dola sopra ombuta loke niva meba gashi yares. Jin soja jen suteg maris jeb. Sabin ge tangi jen kare sugre. Dola sopra ombuta loke niva meba gashi soja su migyuru shena sesuna. Tati tera loke chana rini bashi de keba ina. Ilu di lu bashi de keba ina, yuan kuyu soja su tegri eslabde. Tati kaji digi yuan kuyu soja su teg mari, sala soba te gashi le ombuta nilo kiri niba mingeti de yaris.
Karsatsotan.
Ombuta dola soba ombuta nilo kiri niba meba gashi le gashi de soja su teg maris.
So we started by saying that the materialists claim that it's not possible to cultivate compassion for as long as it takes to become enlightened because there are no past and future lives. Then we had the verse that was talked about just at the end of the morning class, which is the main position, Buddhist position, which is to say that certain elements of living beings cannot arise exclusively from physical matter, right? So then the next point is that the Buddhists will kind of attack the materialist view. So the materialists, even though the materialists maintain that mind is a derivative of matter, either it's a quality of matter, or it's essentially matter, or it's related in an essential way to matter, that's their position. So the Buddhists say, well, okay, then how do you determine when life, things that we want to call life, even if their ultimate nature is that they're material living beings, or that their minds are explainable in terms of their physical bodies. So how do you distinguish between the source from which living beings can arise and the physical matter which don't have the ability to generate living beings? So it starts out by presenting the materialist point of view, which the materialists will claim, yes, not all physical matter is the source of what we want to call animate life. So stones and so on don't have the capacity to generate living beings. They don't arise. So there are different kinds of matter. But then the Buddhists will say, well, how do you determine what sort of physical matter does have the capacity to produce life, what we call life, even in this materialistic view, versus the kind of matter that doesn't or is incapable of producing animate life. And so the Buddhists will argue you don't have any way to differentiate what kind of physical matter is capable of doing that. And so then the unwanted consequence follows is that in any physical place, some kind of animate life should be, according to your view, capable of sort of springing into being.
Nambashibati Jumala Sobatus, Pujani Kigiarva, Kit Kigiar, Nielent Kigia Marva.
That's
Jesa Juatamje, Soja, the Sabin, Tanichen, Ta Imbatas, Sabin with Tanichen, Imbat, Juatas. Soja, Juatamje Sabin, Soja, the Sabin, Marva. Ta Tanichen, Juata, Gandu, Trishila Soba, you and me do a Sajo chat, I am never checked. Sajo dinner. Soja Gyumed siate, Sachai Yamas. Sajo dinner, Soja Gyumed siate.
yes.
Yaki Yamarva. Never isn't it till Soja Karasa Sasul and Soja Sabin, Soja Karasa. Number she would keep a Sabin Shiat is. That cannot be Siati General Sasu Juan, the Soja Kigutuba Sierra. Jason Soja Sabi Yarisina. And that's Juan Soja Soji Batas, Sot and Batas. Sot and Dimba Soja Sabi which Soja Sabi Bata electing Soja Kyo which. Chuleteni Soja Kyo Yariti, Chuti Soja Sabi Marva, Kojenji Jigan of Chirva. No, that is the
So this argument is, some point out that the different versions of the root text that people have, so the wording, or the numbering rather, of the verses is not all the same. So sometimes I've said, we were talking about verse so-and-so, numbered so-and-so, and it doesn't match the version you have. Apologize for that. So the best thing that I can say is if a number is given, then look a couple of verses on before or after, and you should be able to find it. But there are different versions of the root text that are available, and I cannot account for the difference in the numbers, so I apologize for that. At any rate, we're talking about what my version suggests would be verse 40, which is in the Enlightenment Possible book is verse 38, and I think the version that is only the English, it may actually be verse 40. So that's the verse that we're talking about right now, which is kind of expressing this Buddhist kind of counter argument against the materialist position. And so it says, it gets up this text, it says, the Buddha says, even though you, materialists, you want to claim, as ordinary observation shows, that even though we materialists want to say that the mind is a derivative of matter, we don't want to say that mental things should therefore be able to appear just by virtue of the presence of physical matter. That there are certain kinds of physical matter that give rise to life, and certain kinds of physical matter where we wouldn't think it's possible for life to occur, and that's just sort of common sense observation. But your position does not allow you to be able to give some definitive reason for that difference. And so the Buddhists say, if your view is true, you cannot account for the criticism that it says Joan Tamche. Joan Tamche means every form of the physical elements, the four elements in the classical world, where earth, the four elements are earth, water, fire, and air, and wherever they are present, then that physical matter, whatever form it takes, should have this potential. I mean, it should possess the seeds for generating life. And according to the materialist position, you cannot disprove that. You cannot give any reason why that wouldn't be the case. And so then in this verse, it uses a phrase. There's in Buddhist literature, there are 4 kinds of birth states. There is birth from an egg, there's birth from a womb, there's what's called spontaneous or sometimes miraculous birth, and then there's a form of birth which is described as birth from warmth and moisture. And that birth from warmth and moisture doesn't mean that literally heat and water generate life. It generally means it's beings that are born seasonally during the wet season in India, and it has to be warm enough, and then you have mosquitoes and insects and things that arise in that time. And so that's a term, however, the Buddhists are not saying that those forms of life arise out of the water and the warmth. It's just a term for a certain class of beings. So then that term is what's appearing in this verse 40. And it says, while we use that term, we Buddhists use that term, we only think of the warmth and the moisture as a cooperating or an efficient cause, or something that promotes the arising of life, certain kinds of life, in those conditions. We don't mean that the life actually is generated by water and heat. On the other hand, for you have no way of denying or refuting or showing why it's not possible for living things. That says sachok means that you cannot point to a place and give a valid reason why life could not spring from that locus, from that physical location and the physical matter present there. Because according to you, physical matter contains the seeds or the potential out of which something mental can manifest itself. So even inanimate physical matter could somehow produce living beings, according to you. And that's what the Buddhist argues against the materialists. Sorry, I was trying to give clarity to the argument.
That could do Juan attended cook gave us on Juan Yeneti Shevach Maris Sojati. Juan by Shivik is Lavina. Manandu to be Shivik Teni Sojaki or Yarba, Bukiwa Yarba, Shadows. Shayarba. Shalatini shampoo to give to buy. I thought he shot your Sojati in Batarasi. I'm going to Sojati and there is the Pulatini. Sojaki or Yarba. Prosejaki in the Bachiari, and you could pronounce Soji. Put a song message about it. Kanguru so you see Marba. So
for instance, this notion of warmth and moisture being a condition for the arising of certain kind of creatures, but we don't see actually the source of where those organisms arise. Maybe their eggs are too small or whatever. We just see that some kinds of insects and so on arise. A similar example is if you take a piece of raw meat or something and leave it out and exposed, maybe a fly lands on it. We don't see the fly landing on it. It lays its eggs. We don't see those eggs, and all of a sudden maggots appear. So is it the case that you want to claim that the maggots actually, the source of the maggots is the meat? Is the meat this inanimate physical matter that produce the living, maggots that are, can be produced or would appear in that flesh. We don't want to say that. But according to your position, that would seem to be entirely reasonable. That where do those maggots come from? They actually came from a dead piece of meat, or by the same token, some rock or something could actually produce some kind of living creature.
다들은 양을 파지 레벨이 추기만 내봐 추장만 쉬고 지스 추장만 쉬고 지스니 추기나는 다 소자 내시고 마고 유세고 양진데스 전에 나도 소자 교회야 봐. 디카르체베스 다그 조안 버시를 깨버리는 거기 조안이 다들 추기 시부지자 장마시부지 수요샤버리 이내야 그들의 유 고마버리 수부세버리 땅까지 차다르 그 유부도가 진짜 깨를 가르쳐버리지 그 조안 버시를 깨버리는 다 조안데 추디 장마시부 수요차로 딱 그 뒤는 소자 대비 만들었으니까 게임을 보야지. 게임에 지쳐를 왔으게. 다티 가리 게임 가르쳐 제일 중요해 했으니. 다티 중앙 바시레 로스 규제 실바지야래 했으니. 뒤에는 아니 그 라멘의 유나티 디리스 추디니 그 장마시부스 이제 지체를 했어. 이내야 소자한테 라멘의 지켜야지. 그 중앙 바시리 깨버리는 다 소자들이 집어러고 가도 집어러고 지운 그래서
So, and then another kind of a different what verse are we talking about now? This is
양 주제만 내가 자네 샤베난도 소자 고마로라 리세로다 텔레 도베 메도가 깨와 미테바타 중앙tam시인데 중앙tam기 규례계를 중앙tam기 규례계에 가면 되면 말이지
자나는 디요레
자만이
Okay, so it's not in the root text. In the commentary, it's sort of a different approach to this idea of the unreasonableness of claiming that mind arises from matter. So the argument is, if you prepare water in such a way that it is very clear, Dhamma, Shuddha Dhamma, actually says that it's, and you use strain it. You strain it with a very fine strainer, so there shouldn't be any impurities in the water. And then, if you leave the water for a certain period of time, it's possible that you would find certain kinds of life would be generated in that water. And they would be of varying types. So the commentary says that some things may have red heads, some things may have yellow bodies, for instance. And so how do you account for the fact that the medium, in this case the water, it seems to be very uniform. And so if the physical matter, as according to you, is the source of the animate being, or the mind, then whatever creatures might form in that medium, they all should be the same, right? And yet we can find that they don't always look the same. They have different appearances. So if they have different forms, but they take birth or they arise in the same medium that has the same consistency to it, then that suggests that the source of those different kinds of beings must be something other than the physical matter where they arise.
다디 이 계란에 파 충분해서는 그 잘라서 아니 Nyabatiya Maris, Carres and Kuja, Lula, Meted Gyumed, Chutang Sitamachina, Gyumed, Katomid, Gyumed, Gyumed, Soja, Tamje, Leg is having Tangi is. Semja Kanga leg is Savage Tani is what the leg whichever is. Juma Basile, Jebin, Jumati. Chiba, and Kato Jamali,
So the argument is that if the physical locus in which beings arise is uniform, then every sentient being that occurs in that particular locus should look exactly the same. And so the fact is we find that that's not always the case. So then the materialists might argue, well, what answer do you have that will account for that? Or why would your view be any better than ours? And so Gyumed commentary says that our view is that there's nothing inconsistent about the fact that all different kinds of creatures can be found in more or less the same area, because according to our view, all living beings they don't arise from the physical environment exclusively. They're produced by their own karma, and if their karma is different, then their form it's very reasonable that their form could also take on a different aspect.
That is. That is, also Rangi relative some in the chills. That is Chirang the Chevaina, Mongolos of the Rangi met Meba, Johnson Mikeva Cherry, Chirang Kelly, Bayasa, Canani gave it you great cigarette. Dinner, Juan somebody, Julikevich, Kuja, Gyumed, Soja Tamje, Lake Savage, Tamiji, Invich. Then I cheated Juan Chick, Soja Sudua, Hin, Soja Suduata. Also Rangi, Indala, Yoba Mabel, Juan. Someday, Juan in the children. Chabata, the Juna, Soja, Sukeme Gigi, Yuki, Kavan, Nebby children. Wana Kira Lion, Ombule, Gyune, Yelutoba, Kavan, Deva, Maibata, Mayana Mishina, Siri Pen to Batamia. Akukaji, Guti, Leveria, Chanangulia, Ranulia. Ombole Gyune, Yilutoba, Javar Deva Mayina Musina, Cherry Pando Batam, Yang, Doji, Kuchabaji Mayis, Tati, Luigi, Yilu Pendo Bayadi is here. Ine Luigi, Yilu Doji, Kuchabaji Maris. The Kuchabai Yudan Karesana. Mungula Gyune, Yilu Topacha Yarva. Mungula Tene, Yere, Tamu Migo Umbalatene, Onshiki, Onshi, Tangane, Tene, Yilu Gigerva, and Mumbutune, Yilu China, Mumbutue, Tamu Muzi Mishiki, Umbutelatene, Miwalatene, and Undi Mishiki. Mundi Mishigo to Mumbutu Shiki River, the Iluba, the Uncle the Green Temple, Uncle the Tingles, Green Temple, Inea, Uncle the Suruba, Inea, Unity, Yulu Doji, whichever the Maris. 어디 이루지 공부를 tembaye review temba tum yare si tadi 공부지 ni 이루지 공부지 내 제시디 이루가 지문지 무슨 레텐 기계가 무슨 공부를 때문에 그거가 명화를 때문에 어째서 귀인의 공부를 때문에 있어요.
So there's a further argument about saying that mind is dependent upon the faculties, and in particular the sense faculties. So in this case, the example is if you have for visual perception, for instance, if you see some object of the eye that's perceived through the eye consciousness, then through the eye faculty, then an eye consciousness will occur, sensory eye consciousness, and then subsequent to that sensory eye consciousness, there will be a recollection of having had that sensory perception, right? And so that recollection is purely mental, right? That's an element of the mind. So then the argument is being said, well, don't you hold also that purely mental state, that recollection of the prior sensory awareness, is due to, or is dependent upon, or is Gyumed means through the medium of the faculty. So it's not the physical faculty essential for the arising of that mental state. That almost like saying that something physical is responsible for the mental entity. So that's kind of the materialist is arguing back against the Buddhist. But the Buddhist replies, we don't deny that the physical body, and in this case the faculties that are responsible for sensory perception, are instrumental in generating certain kinds of mental states. But what we do deny is that the mental states are completely governed by the physical conditions, even the physical conditions that contribute to their arising, by which is meant that in their absence, then the mental entity would simply disappear. So that the mind is completely dependent on the body in the sense that if the body is taken away, or as in when the body disintegrates, then the mind must also disappear. So the relationship between the mind and body is not that kind of relationship. The Buddhist falls back to that position.
치료 공격적네.
Lobsang.
가족의 내인도 전부 가족의 문제 류
Lobsang.
류지 양국이야가
Right.
그냥 그 가족의 내인 공격적인 생부터 대하여 최두별과
Lobsang.
이루 약피기다.
Lobsang.
다 이루는 양해를 지중순한 류를 믿어인 거야. 유양야
Lobsang.
어디 누가 알아서.
So there's a phrase, Lobsang means to reverse, or to, in this case probably more like to eliminate. To say that the body is the kind of substratum for the mind. So ten means that the basis from which the mind derives. So if the body is the main basis for the mind, meaning the mind is utterly dependent on the body, then the phrase is that the mind is something that can eliminate the existence of the mind, and that it is a primary substratum for the mind. Say, that's what the Buddhists are rejecting. So that there is a relationship between the body and the mind. Each one can influence the other. But the body is not the basis for the mind, in the sense that if it's taken away, then the mind cannot exist. So I believe that's a fair representation of the phrase. It's not a substratum or basis for the mind that is upon which the mind is totally dependent. That's not the case. So an example of that for the Buddhists is that if your sense faculties, which are physical, are damaged, right? You become blind or deaf. So that's something that is damaging to your physical aspect. But the mind itself can remain intact and not have any impairment to it whatsoever, right? You can think of examples of extraordinary people who were blind and deaf or whatever. On the other hand, if the mind is impaired, or the mind becomes subject to some oppressive quality, right? For instance, if you become ill, or if you become very upset, that can actually affect you physically. So in that case, the mind can be thought of as being more dominant in the relationship between the mind and the body than the body is in relationship to the mind. So that's one point. And another example of that would be, for example, spiritual practitioners, yoginis, who undertake very severe austerities, or who live a very austere life. Those individuals, especially as they age, they can become very emaciated and physically look weak. And yet their minds, in fact, can be very highly developed to an extraordinary level, in such a way that it's kind of at odds with the condition that their body has taken on. So this is another indication of the fact that the mind is not primarily dependent on the body.
No, that kind of beauty, many you take Chabaji money. Tembayaris, for junior tembayaris, says in the Niwala 10 Yiluti, Mambuti, Yiluti, Mambuti, on ship tensuna, on ship, on board tensuna, Niwala tensuna. Just a junior thing is, the Doji, you Chabaji Maris, 디카레스는 류리 두아치는 이리 두아 루프야 말이야. 다 이들이 아니 위기 도지 주체가 되지. 이를 주도 주지장가 그냥 이디 대부 야보를 지내서 유리디 기부를 지는 거예요. 유리디 대부 대단을 샘상부지는 유리디 무슨 그렇지. 샘 기부는 유리디 대단유명한 개발이야. 샘 기부면은 유리 대단유명한 능도가 이것은 이디 유리 때 조직이 되지.
So the relationship between the body and the mind is such that each one does have an influence on the other. That's not, Buddhists do not object to that. They accept that. They use the term that the body has sort of more of an indirect influence. Gyumed means not directly, but indirectly they influence your purely mental aspect. So through the sense faculties, then sensory perception arises, and then subsequently the mind itself can be affected by your physical senses, for instance. On the other hand, the body does not have that sort of governing influence over the mind. But the reverse is true, that the mind can in fact have more of an influence over the body than the other way around. And so, for instance, virtuous states of mind can in fact promote physical well-being, and then unhealthy states of mind, what we would call unhealthy states of mind, can also have a deleterious effect on your physical well-being.
Just very good. That one you ten Yamari Vesina, Tochi ten Yamari Vesina, Tiaris. That the Nami you can you the Marki Sebe Lechierba Nami Nami to Chigi Lechierba Leti to Ginevierba Iruti Nami Irucherba Leti Sosuna Kototuri Iruti Pena Miki Agi Nami Luna Leti Sodutu Ani Nam Iruti Nami Iruti Totor Nami Irusiati Oh, did the daughter that is an Nami Iruti or Jiggy Yama never was in the Tiaris Sambele could Dojigi Sambele Legiers Nami Piji Legier.
So then one can ask the question, well, is there anything that does have a controlling influence over the mind, in the sense that it can reverse the mind, it can cause the mind to no longer continue to exist in a certain way? And so the Buddhists will say, yes, there is. There is something that can affect the mind in that manner. And so there is there's an element of our being that is our existence that is identified as being due to the ripening of karma. There is an element of our being that exists due to incidental ways in which we live our life. So one is namin. Namparmimba literally means the ripening aspect of our being. So there's a ripening aspect of our mind. So the ripening quality of the aspect of our mind that is the direct result of karma from a prior life is such that its existence is controlled by the karma that produced it. And when that karma, when the power of that karma to maintain that fruitional aspect of the mind is exhausted, then that fruitional aspect of the human mind can no longer remain, and it will disappear. Meaning that human life, that human person's human mind can no longer continue to exist. So karma, that karma can have that kind of controlling over effect over the continued existence of the mind, that portion of the mind that is governed by karma.
다때네 예루 똑같이래 온불라서부터 스케버리 제버리 그래서는 다 류레세버지 제베 셈벨레 것이 것이 것이다 민소 공부는 편집이 규칙이야. 근데 편집이 규칙은 민소 공부 비하라. 어디 인사는 류디 예루를 때는 중앙에 남이 류디 이거를 했으나 류레세버지 제베 아니 남이 레 셈벨레 제르가 셈벨레 때니 니레서도 온부터 남이 온부터 스케버가 뒤쪽에
So, on the other hand, that aspect of our mind, which is governed by karma and is a ripening of our karma, is in fact the quality that has influence over our bodies and our faculties. So the karma that is responsible for or has the power to produce the mind, the mental existence of a particular life form, is that mind is responsible for then the development of the corresponding physical body that accompanies that birth state. And so the mind, it's that mind has more of a control over the nature of the physical body and the senses that accompany that life.
다디 남이 류디시게 남이 류디리 지당 류라버티 문주 밤에 그달에 때문에 부비야리 게 레기 팽샤부게 말이 레기 팽샤부게 말이 레기 팽야디 남이 류디 팽야리 남이 류디 슈세티 남이 류디 슈세티 다디 밤에 그달이 길이 슈버와 다 밤에 그달 류라버티 밤에 그달에 때문에 부비야리
맞아요.
다 온부티게 그래서는 남이리 온부당세야 제르바
이 남이를.
남이리 되고 셈벨레레 때문에 부가르바
So there are different ways of thinking about our life, our existence. There's one element of our existence that is produced by and governed by karma. So there is even a physical element of our being that is related to the karma of a particular birth that we may take. On the other hand, there is an element of our physical being that is not directly produced by our own karma, but rather it's derived from our parents. The substance, the semen and egg, that is the source out of which the rough physical body develops. That rough physical body is not necessarily directly tied to the karma that is responsible for certain elements of our physical being, such as our physical faculties. For instance, in that verse, we started by saying that the breath, the faculties, and the mind are coming from some prior source of a common nature. So this is a distinction that probably most of us are not completely familiar with, but is a distinction that occurs in Abhidharma literature. One is called the aspect of our being, which is a karmic ripening, and then the other one is called Jorwa Lejoma. Jorwa Lejoma means then some aspect of our physical being that is governed by circumstances in a particular life. So you would say the nature, it's governed by nature, as opposed to governed by karma. So this idea of two aspects of our being, one of them is identified as being governed by karma, and therefore is a ripening aspect of our being that produced by karma, and then another aspect of our being that is affected by circumstances, what would you say, sort of incidental kind of circumstances in that lifetime. These two aspects of our being are not separable. You can't say, well, there is the part of your physical being that is only affected by incidental circumstances, and then and that there's somewhere inside you there's a different part of you that is the part that is governed by karma, and these two are existing separately from one another. That's not the case. However, when we are born, if, for instance, depending on our lifestyle, right? So if we have a good diet, or depending on what our diet is, that can affect the condition of our body. Our body can become more healthy or less healthy depending on those kinds of issues. Those elements of our physical being are not directly related to karma. So there is the karmic ripening aspect of our physical being that is sort of, what you used the phrase that that aspect of our being sort of pervades our physical body, but is not affected by incidental conditions such as those. And so this is something that this distinction is something that is addressed in Abhidharma literature. And so, as an analogy, Rinpoche said, well, you can have a house, and you can build a house, and then the house would be something that is, governed by, whatever your resources might be in that, that particular time. But there's, electricity that is, you have the wiring in the house, and that allows you to illuminate the house. And so you may put an addition onto your house. You may expand your house, but the wiring and the ability to sort of illuminate the house would not fundamentally change. He used that analogy to describe the fact that there are these two aspects to our physical being. There's a subsequent, I'm not sure, I don't know the exact verse that this corresponds to, but in the commentary, there's a section which where the materialist is presented as then responding by saying that the position that's being represented as the Buddhist position seems to be at odds with actual word of the Buddha. There's some passages in canonical writings which suggest that the Buddha said that the mind depends on the body. So is this doctrine that you're asserting, you Dharmakirti are asserting, or you Buddhist scholar is asserting, are you not in fact at odds with what the founder of the Buddhist tradition himself asserted? And so the point being that there is a passage that one can find in the scriptures in which the Buddha is said that is reported to have said that Ludang Semyi Pensun Jesu Java. Pensun Jesu Java says that they are then mutually affecting one another, and that's the actual wording that's identified. And so does that not suggest that one half of that relation is that the mind depends on the body? So the Buddha said they both depend on each other, so at least in part the Buddha is saying the Buddha did not say the mind depends on the body. And so then the commentary here is stating that the Prelumic Dharmakirti's view is that the meaning of that statement, properly understood, is only that what the Buddha meant by that is only that sensory consciousness, the forms of consciousness that arise through the body, and those are the 5 sense consciousnesses, that those can have an effect, a beneficial effect on the mind. So if you have a pleasant physical experience, that can cause the mind to experience some kind of ease, for example. So in that sense, the body is, pandopa means to benefit, but this can have an effect, a favorable effect on the mind. And that's all that the Buddha meant. He was not talking about that the mind was derivative from the body.
Jampa the Jawasiati, Semi City doing it to Tirva. All these are named Sem Sambo channels in the So,
in fact, the Buddhist view is while the Buddhists do acknowledge that the body can have an effect on the mind, both favorable and unfavorable. The more important Buddhist then attitude is that between the body and the mind has a much more powerful ability to influence the body, assuming that you are able to control your mind. That by controlling your mind in a positive way, that can affect your physical well-being. So favorable spiritual attitudes such as loving kindness and compassion, by their very nature, have a beneficial effect on the body. They can cause you to be then much more at ease, physically at ease, than the reverse. By the same token, if you don't have control over your mind and you allow yourself to generate, harmful minds, or if you're depressed, even, that could become, strongly, those kind of strong emotional states can have a harmful effect on your health, for instance. No, so. 70.
네, 저것도
Oh, that's not so.
다른 내 인디비드가 내가 인디야. 리만지 두개가. 이내 70야 컴퓨터야. 디폰 그래서 유리디 디도지 유체바. 유리도지 유체바지. 많이 다 그래서. 유리 교도 또 기생을 교도 부분에 그래.
Previously, I think I want to revise a way I translated something. I said that the body does not have the ability to put an end to the mind. That I was referring to the phrase "dokje." Dokje literally means to reverse or to cause it to be turned back, literally. I think the meaning is not as extreme as meaning that the body is the governing factor for the existence, the very existence of the mind. Although in fact that is the materialist position, what's being discussed here, and that what that phrase is more narrowly focusing on is which has a governing influence over the other in the relationship between the mind and the body. Is the body more? Does it have a greater element of control and influence over the mind than the mind does have over the body? So the Buddhist position is the body does not have a controlling influence over the mind. Dokje means this ability of being able to reverse it. So one way of reversing it would be if you do something to harm the physical body, it would necessarily harm the mind. And so then that's a Dokje Gyu, means some kind of reversing, some kind of cause that reverses the condition of the related element, mind or body. And then Kyewarjen means that it is, it literally means extraordinary, an extraordinary reversing cause, if you want to take it literally. But the idea is that while each one has an influence over the other, the mind has more of a controlling influence over the body, and the mind is also able to be unaffected by the body in a way that is not true of the body. So the mind can very directly affect the body in a positive and a negative way, and while the body can also have an effect on the mind, that in certain instances, for example, those who are yogis and those who have control over their minds, those types of beings, even though the severity or the austerity of their lives can cause their outer appearance to seem to be weakened or diminished or emaciated physical bodies, for instance, that in no way is harming their minds. Their minds can be extremely developed, and they can be in a state of great well-being, mental well-being, which their body sort of belies. So, on the other hand, kind of speaking of persons other than yogis and yoginis, if we are subject to very strong mental afflictions, desire and the like, that can can impair our physical well-being. On the other hand, very strong virtuous states of mind, which are salutary, can also impart a sense of physical ease, and that's indicative of the more powerful influence that the mind has on the body than the body does on the mind. Okay, so with that, then you're free to ask some questions. you have a question? Sorry? No, that's okay. All right, okay.
I was thinking back to Dharmakirti's definition of what is a valid cognition,
Right.
of being new and non-deceptive,
Right.
and that Prasangika doesn't accept the new part of it.
Right.
But then I was thinking, like when I see a color blue, and then you ask me 5 minutes later, I'm not sure exactly whether it was as vivid or turquoise or what shade of blue I was looking at. So
Okay.
my memory's not reliable. So it seems like the first instant of cognition should be an accurate one, a non-deceptive.
Okay.
So why does Prasangika not accept the new part of
Oh,
definition?
okay, those are different things, but that's fine. Dene karsa di karsa chabanamdegi lugla ane cheme cheni di sardu ripa sayatila ane sardu senti ko tango uti ane top karsa ko yugi ngo topati kachama imati ane chinjongi 제시지 네 가르사 제만 많이 받지 그 피아와지 요아레 센타메 루라 아니 탱교베 루라 되게 가르사 이케 캐는 게도 다 제시 거라요 이 테마지 자샤게레 근데 뭐 계시디나 saya lihat peti situ mana, tinggal di tak kasa cacat orang itu soal sambil peti situ, pernah tak sosu ki kado cik tong sona, kado tong tu kanga, kok kado kani berdi ki tak musuh tu cik tong ke yozang kurang di tak kok tak butuh be. 내가 소리치 자샤게 말해. 아니 디캅들라 아니 고강 통한 난신 코라니 이바 대마 이바 소리치 딜라 가르사 고 디기 체제 소리치 자샤게 말해. 다디 까마 카셰게 쇼라 디 문진 믹세 디기 쇼라 까마나게 쇼라 근데 상담디 젠 투게 말해. 나나 까마나 냐리야. 나 카드지 통바래 이는 그 카드지 따까 난신 저만함디 샤금이 놓으세요. 제전디 딱 먼저 믹세게디 그런 카드 유예가디 그런 모니터네 코스마 이마디 인베스터 두스 난 저바디 쇼를 좋은디 그냥 셀라 마세넬라 망에 소리치 디데게 소리치 냠냠한데 요게 인자 아니 다디 제셰디 딱 그런디 난 담보 또 백감난시 tak korsa kwe tak solchi mai ba solchi sama sami do stati damara chirves inda solchi nengai tamot di jigi do gase
다치다치는 동바 상계 세티 문도 미네 탑다 제바는 체마 이세티 문도 미디 탑다 제바는 미로가 코란기 제바나시 되는 내 인상 아니 미루아스 제가 기부 체마 스타버바 미루아라 다로기 디샤르바 디나시다 제시데 미루아 지야르 사토자스티 사토지 자바리 미쇼 미루아티 그 셈담벨로레네 수이레네 미루아티 레수나 제시디
라소
사토자니디기 제시디 체마 제바리 제시들은 미루어 참기 두시게 해.
아네.
산토 참만 말이 산토 말이 있으게. 참만 많이다.
오케이.
샘담바에 그 미루어티 캬니스나. 미루어세티 유리티 내주 지다와시 파이. 또 바이산. 그 또야 나시 되는 레벨 인상 미루어시게. 어디서 상계기 아니 상계티 체메기부 인세티 유디 미루아 이상 아니 체메기부 인세로 이제는 체메기부터 잡두가 이제는 미루어디 미루어 이상 제벌바 모두 미리 터드 제벌라 미루어 인단디 이 지다를 세번을 시도는 내가 있어 그래서 미루어에 제벌바 다 센tam바단 군인이가 미루어 캐는 집어래 미루어 캐집 집에 있는 센tam바디 신바이 지도하신 마도 생각봐 제시 미루어 캐는 대로 다 살도디 다 분이 되지 야래 살도디기다 디 가수에 살도디니 야래 제바체만 세야지 뒤지다지 제네 또 되고 집어래 제바체만 세야 되봐 제바 있는 이가 또 봐 제바체만 이 장게 제신이 또 거의 집어래 뒤지다 제네 또 거기 집어래 무슨 그 장게 제시스는 무슨 뒤 세버리시 또 그와 뒤지도 말해봐 디 장게 제시 디 전부 디 뒤지다 제네 지야봐 이리 제가 지켜도 봐 일단 제발의 장배 제시 일단 제발이 뒤집어 되는 또 지바 이봐 아니지 다티 타니 유치리 유디지 시대지 왜서지
So, kind of the one thing that Rinpoche kind of pointed out about the way you raised the question that I think he wanted to maybe, what should I say, clear up, for lack of a better word, is that when the, and I'm sort of interpreting what he said, when you said that the subsequent recollection of the perception doesn't seem to be as clear as the initial perception, and therefore that seems to suggest that the Yogacara kind of extra requirement that it be the initial perception in order for it to be cognition, and that the subsequent recollection, the recognition of it, is not, because it can be less clear or less vivid, as you put it. He said that's really not the distinction that the Yogacarans are making. They're not saying that the post perceptive recollection is somehow less correct. Both of them are milua, right? Milua means there's something there. So the idea of milua, of being non-deceptive, is, to use the Tibetan word. The Sanskrit word is more like to not be in disagreement with what is purported to be the case, right? So if what the mind is perceiving corresponds to what is actually there, then that's what the idea of non-deceptive sort of means. And that can be true of the subsequent recollection as much as it is of the first instant of perception. So the way that you phrased that distinction really was sort of not exactly giving the difference between the Yogacara view versus the Prasangika view, right? So I think one of the points that he made was that, right? Then the other point that he made was that the whole point of this chapter is that while we're talking about what correct cognition is in the general sense, right? And for Buddhists, there's two kinds: there's direct perception and there's inference. The ultimate subject, or the ultimate point that the chapter is trying to make, is that the Buddha has the qualities that are associated with correct cognition, but in a special way. In a special way that his enlightenment is such that everything that he expressed everything that he taught about valid spiritual goals and the means of achieving those spiritual goals conforms exactly with the way he saw them and the way he experienced them and the way he in fact pursued them and achieved the result, his own personal experience. So in that sense, what he said about that subject matter is then non-deceptive in the same way that we consider the general epistemological sense of correct cognition to be non-deceptive. So then he said, in that sense, when we're talking about the Buddha, that seems to be more an idea of what valid cognition means as the Prasangikans purport it to be, which is non-deceptive in an unqualified sense, and that idea of being the initial, cognition of the object as being, required for it to be, correct cognition. That doesn't seem to apply to the way it's being used to describe Buddha as sort of the being who embodies, in the ultimate sense, correct cognition, right? So he made that point. And then what else? Let's see. So the other thing was simply that idea of the jieshe, or he made this other point. Okay, so he said also there are two kinds of correct cognition: direct perception, right, and inference, right. And so there, the Sardu Milua, that the Yogacara definition of what is correct cognition, equally applies to inference as it does to direct perception. So it's not only direct perception for the Yogacharans that is embodying that definition, right? However, the nature of correct cognition that is direct perception versus the nature of cognition that is correct inference, they're different. And one way to see the difference is in terms of that recollection or recognition of the moment of the first moment of cognition. So the first moment of direct perception is, in the case of direct perception, sensory perception or even yogic direct perception, is an aconceptual state of mind, right? It is direct, it is unmediated by any kind of dualistic thought, right? Or any kind of concepts. Then the recollection of it, that is, like you were saying, that you remember what you perceived, that kind of being the way of verifying what you actually perceived in an aconceptual experiential state. That, however, is conceptual. That recollection is reflective, and it perceives what you directly perceived sensorially. It perceives it via the mechanism of mental imagery. Donji, Tibetan word donji means some kind of conceptual image of what it means to perceive blue. And so those two are different in that one is aconceptual, the other is conceptual. But in the case of inference, they're both conceptual. In inference, the first moment of perceiving inferentially something, as the Yogacharans claim is the true, correct inferential knowledge, right, is also via these conceptual image, not directly. And then the moment that follows it, where you reflect and you recall what you perceived through your inferential powers, that too is conceptual. So that distinction is something that needs to be noted, and that's that the case of inference didn't really fit the example that you gave. Both of them were conceptual, and so he's giving you things to think about.
That is same number rangible venture to that Cheshi the Chemangari said it, coaches and Tinashi start 살도 또 인주고 지야르바 되는 파테 전선은 살도 또 번나시 지니 뒤대지 지인물과 뒤연사 지나는 시험의 시제 나 이거 몇째 살도 참았어야 되셔야 돼 제시디 그디 처마디 똑지 또 셔버지르바
Okay.
처마디 똑지 또 셔버 인상 처마 또 번나시 지 매버 인상
Okay.
다 대주베티 미루가 뒤에는 지그레스 제리 지데지 이스나
So, rather, continuing on to kind of the issue that you raised, the Prasangika, not the Prasangika, the Swatantrika Madhyamaka school, which generally accepts the principles of the epistemological school of Dhammapada,
이거는 제티는 스타토리
they use that same quality of the original non-deceptive moment of cognition. But the distinction they make between that and the subsequent moment where you are aware, you're reflectively aware of what you perceived, the real distinction they make doesn't have to do with one being more clear than the other per se. The basis of that distinction is that they say that recognition is not, it doesn't have the non-deceptive awareness of the object independently of the initial cognition. So it's only because the initial cognition occurred that it has also the same capacity to continue to have some awareness of that object. But on its own, it is kind of weaker. It's dependent on the first moment. So that seems to be the basis of the distinction. For the Prasangikas, there may be more to it metaphysically than that, but at any rate, that's one thing, one way to look at it. The second point is that for the Prasangikas, they don't make such a distinction. If it's non-deceptive, then that's good enough for it to rise to the level of correct cognition.
Small question. When you said that an arhat's mental continuum can be extinguished,
Right.
and then somehow join consciousness.
There was, okay, yes, you.
So where would that consciousness?
Okay. I think maybe I didn't make the distinction clearly. The point was that there were. I'll give it to the Rinpoche, but he didn't express it that way. Maybe it came through. Daging di ane karsa kyochima ki tuche ki ripat di la ane ripat di chakmatan chewa chi yina ane dine di kyochima that mi tameba di la ane kyochima ki da karsa samjar ki di ngeba de sen so chi dine di tene ane kyochima chi yoru yore ta pecha jana an da joma yina ko chakmatan rewa yinzang koran samjaya 요마레 아니 뭐랑기 게 주도가 그래서 버치기 직야 룩직라 아니 자초바티기 가르사 지 주체와직 룩직시가 야 룩직디 주체게 요마레 때 민상자게 요마레 때 이네 코란 리파디 유닛 직 디게레 센스지 Chaos. That moment, the Nyamdu Sorji got in, it was trouble. So, the point was, if anything, I apologize for not giving it the distinction clearly. Certain Buddhist schools maintain that if you follow a Hinayana path to arhatship and then achieve arhatship, when you die, then your mental continuum ceases. And does not continue to exist at all. So So that kind of person, that arhat, would not have a future rebirth. So the argument for future rebirth excludes an arhat in that sense, and the only person that is indicated by the argument is the ordinary samsara person who's still subject to desire. When that person dies, necessarily that type of mind will be followed by another moment of consciousness, which will be his rebirth or her rebirth in the next life. So it doesn't apply to arhats, but then there are two different positions in Buddhism. In one position, the mind continuum is extinguished. In a different Buddhist, according to a different Buddhist point of view, the mind condition is not extinguished. It goes into a state of the extreme peace of Hinayana Nirvana, and the mind abides in that state. So it's not extinguished, but it's not reborn samsarically like that. That was the distinction.
A second little question. Just to clarify this body-mind thing. If the body has a condition that physically prevents mind functioning, such as Alzheimer's and the tangles in the brain, or bipolar disease and the genetic conditions that affect the mind, is that the same as saying the body affects the mind or the function of the mind? Is there a discrimination to it?
Bena yang kalsa mi khashe gego chaduga an koranzo ge da injina Alzheimer's sensi ya koranzo giti ani di semdi nyamne an koranzo Jampa me asorati soso min kare ibati di Jampa tuba dan ani mi kalsa 부부장 아니 난기 밑에 저기 두루마나 그런 수입인데 한국에 와만에 아니 소소소소기 냐마 미세기 내수디 제마 투버들에게 다디 생기 나사서 찾아 그래 난 미행 것들 디 제를 받겠으나 가르스게 알았으나 레와나라 기ön 소리지 나사서 차네 안 코셈디 그런 야가지 역제 도움들도 다 롭서 소리잖아. 양 디마이 바양 미 개고 매나이네 쇼바이네 로 가이니 체메버 소리지라 이제기 양 가르사 셈미 대화기 교현되는 지와 미카셰기지 양 가르사 교현제네 다 가르사 출시 소리지는 미께지 시험하는 시 용바 소리진다 지용기 알아 디양 콘서 제를 받겠잖아 디 룰데네기 샘들 교현되는 슈게 알았지 지 펜세디 다 누트라바게 제를 받겠다 소리지 다 나자기 릭 소리지 차자기 근데 나자기 릭디는디 자와디 룰데네지 기계 알았지가 자산디 아니 디 셈라 누에요 직바로와 디 셈라 누에디 셈코라라는 누에요이나 셈딜라 만르베체 셈딜라 다카사코 레기 코란 레가 다 코미 나사메 같은 데는 신 사로 땅마 투어서지 코란 겐게 바서지 지금 컨저스지 남바서를 지자는 딜라 컨저스 통과를 했어요.
남바스 이제는 도순내스 상계민이라서 문에 내 문에 셈비네 티샤브 셈비네 가르쳐 도순 티샤브 차당 무슨 디디는 셈메테와 처리하리 도순내스 상계민이나 비르에 차틀로세
라
도순내스 상계민 근데 문에 아주 내가 강강 내가 이거래. 두순 비네 생비네디 아주 강걸로 이어가 봐. 어제 내 눈에디 두순 비샤리야. 두순 비 장당 무슨 비 온기 아니 생메데와 딩이야. 재산 생상부제는 대부분들이 있어야 돼. 이제 다 생비네디 가르스는 차당 무슨 온기 아니 생각 디기미에 붙여게봐. 아니 생긴에서는 딜이 차단
So, from Buddhist point of view, all illness is essentially comes from the mind. So the mind is the ultimate source of illness. For example, the three root mental afflictions, so three poisons, are the ultimate form of illness. And then in that sense, we all are subject to that impairment or that, ailment, if you want to call it that. And he quoted a verse of homage to the medicine Buddha. In the verse, it refers to the medicine Buddha as the one who heals all the diseases of the three poisons. And so, from a Buddhist point of view, then the mind is its illness does not ultimately come only from the body, but rather what we should think of as all then impairments are ultimately due to either indirectly from our karma or directly from the way we think, and that the mind, just as flawed minds or unhealthy minds can produce illness, similarly virtuous and then positive minds can produce well-being. So that's the way to think.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, I saw you raise your hand, so I no problem.